Welcome to another episode of Appalachian Shine. This is JC Schweingrouber. Whether you're listening to us on the podcast or you're watching us on YouTube, I want to introduce you to Dale Hall. Uh, Mr. Hall, appreciate you coming on to the show today. How are you today?
It's a real pleasure to be here with you, and I'm doing better than I deserve.
Hey, aren't we all? We're all truly blessed, and yeah, I really appreciate you coming on to the show because this is I got a chance to kind of look at your books on Amazon and read through your resume, and so it's kind of a special treat because you're an outdoorsman and you have a long storied career. We're going to talk a little bit about, and you're a native of Harlan County over in Eastern Kentucky, and yeah, it's we have so much to respect and love around here with our wildlife, and it's so diverse here in Appalachia. But before I get into your bio, I did notice that you were a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. You were in from
Yes, sir.
'68. Um, were you in Vietnam by chance?
I was in support of Vietnam. I was in the Philippines. We were what we called the security service. It was we intercepted the coded messages, broke the codes, and then sent the information to our troops. And so that was located mainly there in the Philippines on Clark Air Base. And so I was there in support of them intercepting the Viet Cong, the Chinese, the Cambodians, et cetera, and then sending those messages, the information back to our on the ground troops.
Wow, this could be a totally
Then I
other
was also
episode.
in
Yeah.
then I was also in Italy, where we were spying on Ivan the Soviet. At that time, it was the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
We couldn't send planes to shoot him down, but we still enjoyed tracking Ivan wherever he was.
Thanks so much for your service. And I guess with so much going on in the world today, and we're kind of looking back at North Korea, China, tensions rising. I mean, I guess this has been going on for a long time, but we're really ratcheting up here the last few years. But yeah, that could be a really great conversation with you about today's foreign policy too. But thanks so much for your service. I just want to say first of all,
Uh,
thanks for that. I
Thank
appreciate
you. I
that.
appreciate it.
Um, I actually have an uncle that served during those years as well in the Air Force, and he was a mechanic over in I think Fan Rain. Does that sound
Yeah.
about right? Somewhere
Yeah.
like that. But
Yeah.
I just want to get into. I'm going to read a little bit of the bio that you sent me because you have such an impressive resume here, especially when it comes to conservation. You have 40 years of professional experience in fish and wildlife resource management, both the federal and private sectors. The last 9 years of your career, you were with an organization that I know a little bit about, but I want to talk a little bit more about it too. But you were the CEO of Ducks Unlimited, and if you're a conservationist, I'm sure listening, you know who Ducks Unlimited is. It's a huge organization, and it's been around for a long time. And you did a lot of, I imagine you did a lot of fundraising there because I was looking at how many events you guys had every year. Um, Prior to getting into Ducks Unlimited, you spent over 34 years in federal service working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, 4 years in the Air Force, as we mentioned. But with the Fish and Wildlife, you worked in D.C., Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, and the Southwest region, the Northwest region, and the Southeast region, and places like Alaska, issues in Alaska, Pacific Northwest, and the Forest Plan. And you were 27 years after 27 years with the Fish and Wildlife, you were nominated to be the director of Fish and Wildlife by President George W. Bush and confirmed in the Senate in 2005. So your history of love of nature and just working in conservation goes way, way back. And you started in Harlan, right? So
Right.
you have a couple of books you wrote, you said, that go together. Tell us a little bit about your history and how all this came about. That's a lot of accomplishment and all the awards that came along with it.
Well, first, let me say that uh, I really appreciate saying that they're my accomplishments, but they really aren't. First of all, I believe the hand of my creator was guiding me wherever I went, but I was always on a team with really good people. And it was the team that got things done. I don't claim any of those accomplishments throughout my career. I believe that the people I worked with, and yet none of us does anything alone, and it's the teamwork that makes it happen. So, but that said, But I started off growing up on the headwaters of the Cumberland River there in Harlan County, and literally could wade across the Cumberland River. Of course, now when I drive across it in Tennessee as it heads up, and it's so big now, it's hard to realize that how small it is at the headwaters where those branches come in together. And I grew up on the river. That's what I did, roaming the mountains and fishing and playing in the river, turning over rocks and finding grampuses and crawdads and all kinds of different things to go fishing with. People don't realize it, but way back then, you look at those old cars. You go to a junkyard and they will cut the top off of those old sedans that had the sloping
Yeah.
roofs on them. You could flip those over, and we called them a car top boat. And we mow grass and do things, and for about $5, we could go, get one of our dads or somebody to go in their pickup truck and pick up a car top for us, and that was our boat. So a couple of us could get in the boat and float down the river and have a good time. And those struts that would come up were great for holding your cane pole or those of us that had rods and reels. And we just kind of lived on the river. It was not something that you did for recreation. It was just life.
That sounds
If
like
we
a
caught fish, we took it home. We
modern
took
day
it home
Huck
and ate
Finn
it.
story. Yeah, modern day
Yeah.
Huck Finn story. It sounds like a lot of fun.
And
But
then
yeah,
roaming the hills there, and the hills are just beautiful. At one point I wrote in my book that in the autumn when the leaves are starting to turn in Appalachia, it's proof that the Creator loved art. And it just those kinds of things are instilled in us, that it's not something that you think about doing, you just go do it. So that was how I grew up.
yeah, Central Appalachia, it is a work of art, and these mountains. Some people don't like them; they get out of them. But to me, it's like a warm blanket. You're snug right in the mountains. There's a lot of safety and family and tradition that's unique here. And Harlan's a beautiful place. Now, I haven't been fishing over there. I guess fishing's pretty good.
Yes, it is good. And by the way, those warm blanket just touched something. I mentioned I was blessed to be nominated by the president. And when I was having my confirmation hearings, my opening statement was I was raised in the bosom of the Cumberland Plateau of Appalachia. That's how I started my because that's how I felt. I felt like we were surrounded by love, and we're in the bosom of the Creator's Appalachian Mountains. And I've always felt that way.
Yeah, it's not. I did want to bring up that you have two books on
Mhm.
Amazon, and the first one is called Compelled, from Yazoo pumps to polar bears and back. And this, I guess, you said it was a journey of your career, and then you have My Appalachian Trail, which was a little bit more of a personal story with your family. Tell us a little bit about both those books and sort of why you felt the need to write those.
Well, when I was growing up, I asked my grandparents, who were both born in 1898. The only living ones I had were my mother's. My fathers had already passed away by the time I was born. And I asked them, what was life like when you were growing up? You were born in 1898. Nobody had phones yet. Automobiles were just coming in. You grew up on horseback and riding the hills of Appalachia on horses or mules. What was life like? And their answer was, "Oh, honey, we just got by." If you know Appalachia, it's a closed culture, and you don't talk about things unless you need to talk about them. And I just decided my kids needed to understand more about what's happening in our generation than just, "Oh, honey, we got by." So I started keeping copies of all the issues I worked on, from wetlands issues, the waters of the U.S., to Everglades, to the contaminants, environmental contaminants coming online and how we worked with those, to water out west, endangered species, oil and gas in Alaska, all of those things, Hawaii. I just kept duplicate records of everything, all the court cases, all the internal memoranda. And then what I did is I just went through my career chronologically. I have 40 boxes, by the way, when I retired, of
Wow.
files, and I went those down to 20, and that's what I was writing Compelled with. And so Compelled is an accurate depiction, and I interviewed people that worked with me, so the stories of those issues can be told. And really, the bottom line for each of them that I wanted the reader to get out of it is, yes, here are these conflicts, But the two things that are really the only keys to success, if you're going to work in the public sector or on these big issues, number one is respect. The people out there deserve the respect from government, just as the government is looking for respect from the people. Allow them to sit at the table, and then that builds trust. Because if you're listening to somebody and they believe you're listening, then there's trust. And trust is the key to everything in all of our relationships. So those are the real two points. Every time we found a solution, it was only because those two things happened. And so that's what I try to display in there, as well as giving the facts about the issues. If anybody's interested in like the northern spotted owl and northwest forest, or any of those water out west, we got a drought going on now, and I wrote about those because I worked on those water issues out there to understand how they came about, what the laws say, and all that. Then my Appalachian Trail comes in to talk about my early life and how I grew up, what formed me, I believe, as a person. And then even after I got married, what my family was going through while I was dealing with these highly controversial issues, and the love that keeps us all together.
When you mentioned the owl and some of the things you did in the Northwest, I mean, with your experience, is there, especially when you have Ducks Unlimited, is there a symbiotic relationship from region to region where one thing that impacts there eventually impacts here, and vice versa?
It's really interesting you ask that, because one of the things I learned through my career is that there is so much similarity between what causes the conflicts. Uh, from one end, the players may change. You might have a spotted owl in one place and a snail darter in another place. But the bottom line is those things that we're either government tries to push too hard and ram something, or people are not talking to each other, and you have different policies. What One of the big things people don't understand is that most of these conflicts are not between people. There's not a good person and a bad person on these issues. They're just people that have two different ways of looking at things, because the government has created policy that supports both sides. And as a result, you have policy conflicts. The Northwest Forest is a good example. We had one policy that said, go cut that timber as people got out of World War II. The GIs got the GI Bill. They had the ability to get homes. Well, you had to have homes built. So they went to the public forest to start cutting that timber so that they could do it. And that was a big policy of the government. Go cut the timber so we could build the homes so that the economy could grow. But then you had the environmental, ecological laws that come along, the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, the laws that guide the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, who oversee these forests, tell them that they have to make sure the critters are taken care of. Well, that was the conflict. The conflict was between the policies and how can the agency try or the agencies try and accommodate all of the policies that are being thrown at them. So you go from there to, in the east, water is to get off of your property. Flooding is the issue. Everything east of the 100th meridian, historically, we've had the Corps of Engineers do flood control. Everything west of the 100th meridian, you have the Bureau of Reclamation, whose job it is to deliver water to arid parts of the country. And so all through there, we've got differing policies about, do you get rid of the water? Do you save the water? And all of those things conflict. So there are a lot of similar circumstances that create the issues, whether it's in Everglades or whether it's in the Northwest Forest. There are a lot of similarities in what caused the issues to happen, just different players.
I think one of the things that's probably prevalent in environmental news what I've seen has been the Colorado River over recent years.
Mhm.
And several documentaries have come out about that, and trying to get deliver water out west into parts of California that are very arid, and Arizona, New Mexico,
Mhm.
and conflict there in, I guess, political conflict there in Arizona, where I guess they've had to ration water, especially in
Mhm.
Phoenix and Chandler area, and I actually have some friends that live there, and they talk about the rationing of the water, and then other businesses that come in to bring jobs in, I think one was actually Saudi owned, and they got a waiver on how much water they could use. They could use as much as they wanted, while citizens were being restricted on how much they could use, and that
Right.
causes a lot of conflict too. Um, in your time, how difficult is it to manage a situation like that from a
Well,
leadership?
well, let's take the Colorado as your example. The compact to operate the Colorado River was signed in the 1920s, and it was signed by the 7 states along it, from Wyoming down to California. And they're called the upper basin and lower basin states. Then they also had to figure in that Mexico gets some of this water, because literally the Colorado actually dips down into Mexico and then comes back up down when you get into way down into the southwest. And so Mexico said, well, we get some of this too. Well, the problem that occurred there, it was doomed from the beginning, because in the 1920s, when they decided to have the compact, the 2 years prior to the signing of the compact were the wettest years on record. And when you talk about water and allocation, you talk about acre feet of water. And what that literally means is it's one surface acre that would be one foot deep in water. That's an acre
Okay.
foot. And so when we talk about acre feet, we talk about, the amount of water that would take to cover 1 acre, 1 foot deep. So they because of those 2 wet years, the Colorado River, they said, well, we've got 15 million acre feet of water that come down the river every year to deal with. The problem was that as soon as they signed it, the very next year, it dropped down to its real regular, which was just over 13 million, and it's never been above it since. So it's always been what we call over adjudicated, more water promised than the river can deliver. Then, of course, you get more settlements and more demand and all that. You get
Yeah.
Powell and Meade and these reservoirs being built to regulate and hold back the water and deliver it for agriculture. Remember what I said about out west? It's send the water to me.
Yeah.
Well, they want to try and manage those 13 million, but there's just never enough water, and that the dry period. I won't call it a drought. I'll call it a dry period, because we go through decades of what we call wetter periods where we have a little more rain, and then we go through decades where we have drier periods. We're in one of those drier periods now. And so the water has been going down in Powell and Meade and the reservoirs that feed the cities you're talking about for, well, since I was the director and before. Before that, I was actually the regional director in the Southwest that oversaw the lower Colorado. And we worked out a deal for $620 million coming from 3 of the 4 lower states, Arizona, Nevada, and California, to mitigate for fish and wildlife and help them so that they could get more water. They would do these things to offset the damage to wildlife and help the wildlife and fish, and they get the water. Well, that's been going on since I went there in 2001. So this is a long-standing issue, and water out west is the issue. And frankly, JC, it's going to be the issue of the century, because now we see Florida, Georgia, and Alabama fighting not over quality of water, which usually is what they fight over for Apalachicola Bay and Mobile Bay and those things.
Mhm.
They're fighting over quantity, the actual amount of water. So they're starting to get in the same sort of arguments here in the Southeast that they're seeing out west. So water is going to be the issue just because of population growth and demand.
Yeah, and Florida's population's exploded the last few years. Texas as well. And I think I don't know about Mississippi, but Alabama has seen a lot of population explosion as well. Um, but it's ironic that right in that whole region, you have one city, New Orleans, it's under sea level. You
Yeah.
know, go figure. Only in America, right?
Yeah, only in America.
so, but so I wanted to ask. I mean, you have the. Did you want to read a sample a little bit from each of the books, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about
Well,
specifically here in
well,
Appalachia?
since we're talking about the conservation first, let me read from it. And I think the easiest way to sort of set the tone for the book is to read actually my author's preface, and
Okay.
it's just a few paragraphs, but it it goes. My journey is not so different from any others. I started from humble beginnings, but in a home filled with love and a place where I was free to explore nature. When I was young, I asked my grandparents, what was life like when you were growing up? You were born before the invention of cars or television, and telephones were uncommon. The answer I received was, "Oh, honey, we just got by." The culture of Appalachia was to say as little about one's life as possible to anyone outside the family or family that didn't need to know. My father and mother were part of the greatest generation, and I would never try to dissuade anyone from concurring. But as I was growing up in the hills of Kentucky, the world was beginning to open new horizons in space and technology. Early in my career, I realized that I wanted to be able to explain more to my children about what growing up in the baby boomer generation was like than my grandparents had been able to relate to me about their early lives. Compelled condenses that information into an evolving story of a young biologist who was blessed to be exposed to some of the greatest environmental law minds of the time, as well as the scientists who were blazing the trails for new chapters in conservation. With each challenging conservation issue, I learned powerful lessons about teamwork and the legal mandates of the executive branch of government that I was able to take to my next assignment. With each new issue and geographic challenge, the curtain was pulled back ever so slightly to both administer new lessons through failure and reveal new pathways to success. As the hand of my creator continued to cut away at my ego and desire to be the hero for conservation, he charted the course for me to be a member of the team rather than a combat biologist. I slowly began to understand that a win for conservation is short lived unless it is manifested by a solution created through respect for differing opinions with a compromise that is inside the envelope of the law. I learned that people from all walks of life are conservationists if approached with respect, and that controversy is born when discussions begin with accusations.
Yeah, and that's a powerful way to put that because here where I'm at, I'm in the middle of coal country, and when you talk about conservation and respect and care for your environment, I think a lot of people kind of like they immediately kind of run to one political side or another, like, oh, you're one of those extreme, but you're not. And I've known people. My father worked in the coal mines. My grandfather, my brother-in-law. Yeah, I've never met one person that worked in the coal mines that didn't want to protect the rivers around here and the
Right.
air quality. And it's and I guess that's a tough thing to kind of. In your experience over those years, did you have much experience working here in Central Appalachia, especially with coal and through Virginia to Kentucky, West Virginia?
Interestingly enough, of all the issues I worked on, I did very little work back home where I grew up. Just the assignments that I got were in different places. So I didn't do a lot of work, but I did keep up with it, and I watched, and I got when you think about the restoration and holding back of the silt and that sort of thing, we have to be fair and understand how technology has evolved, and we've learned. When I was growing up, the headwaters there on the Cumberland, where I was doing all that stuff, I watched us start losing red-eye bass and a lot of the red horse suckers and a lot of the species that because the pollution was getting bad, the acid was coming into the rivers. Plus, at that time, we were dumping raw sewage. The
Yeah,
sewage from my house just went into a pipe right into the river. And so we have to remember how far we've come too. I learned in my career that it's real easy to judge, but it's also very cheap.
yeah,
It's really not fair to judge because the people at that time were dealing with it as best they could deal with it. What I'm seeing now is much better. We're seeing the ability to bring back mountain mahogany and a lot of the mountain chestnut, the trees that have been lost because they have learned now how to go back and instead of compacting that soil from as they restore and bring back the overburden and lay it down. And they thought for a long time that you really had to compress that or it would erode away. So then they would compress it and put the trees in. Well, a guy out of London, out of the Forest Service, London, Kentucky, out of the Forest Service figured out, you know what? If we leave that soil loose, we put the trees in there, they take hold really fast, those saplings do, and they hold the soil on and we get the trees back.
yeah. That's
Things
some.
like that.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to ask you about that because um, I know with a lot of like mountaintop removal, the mining that they've done. now you can see aerial photographs where over the years people and the coal companies themselves have sponsored this. They bring in and then replant, and you
Mhm.
would look at an area and never know that there was a coal mine or mountaintop removal right there.
Mhm.
But with the soil, it's so loose and the trees take roots. How long does it take? How many years or I don't know generations does it take before that soil becomes good enough again to start planting and having crops and other diverse types of trees and plants?
Well, what my understanding is, when they go into coal mine, the first thing they do is remove what's called the overburden, and that's the topsoil. They literally will top and move that and set it aside. This is my understanding of it. Again, I didn't really work in here. This is what I've learned along the way, and I hope it's correct. They take what's called the overburden or the good soil and they set it aside, knowing that they're going to have to reclaim later. The Mining Reclamation Act and it used to be the Office of Surface Mining. Those places would, those agencies would require you to do that. So they have the overburden sitting over there. Then they come back and they start filling in with the lesser quality stuff to fill in. And then they bring the overburden back and spread it so you've got some fertile soil there if you can just hold it on. At least that's my understanding. And that's, I think, why the London office there, the Forest Service, was able to figure out we bring that overburden back in and put those trees in there, then they can, those root systems start to take hold and hold the soil in, and it starts to work pretty fast.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was just kind of wondering how long that would take because I know there's some even with mine no, with the Foundation for Appalachian Advancement, we've talked to others who had an interest but didn't have the funding to set up greenhouses on top of these areas so that they would be, they could teach people about what's going on in those locations
Mhm.
and also be able to grow right there in the greenhouse. But over time, over years, show people how the soil can change and use it as an educational point for a lot of people around here. And actually use the greenhouse to give away food to um, the poor folks that can't really afford
Yeah.
that need healthier foods. And I yeah,
And I
it's
think the
very
important
very
point,
important.
I think the important point here, though, is that as we've moved forward, we've learned new techniques. People can't neither condemn nor condone the
Yeah,
coal companies. Let's just say that the companies and the people working with them did what they could, and today everyone's doing what they can. And
yeah,
I think that's what we have to look for. Where do we
yeah,
go from here? Understanding what we've learned along the way, but that coal brought a lot of jobs. It put food in a lot of people's, a lot of children's mouths, and fed families and put
yeah.
some through college.
It
We have
put
to
food on my
understand that
table growing up.
economic policy and that environmental policy coming together.
Yeah. Yeah, it put food on my table growing up, and we have community colleges now springing up around. Well, they've been here forever, in Central Appalachia, where people can go and learn something other than coal mining and try to
Yeah.
diversify economies. So it has been it has been a a godsend. And like you said, looking back and pointing fingers never solved a problem. Never not one problem I could ever think of. And I think an interesting thing. And before I move on, but like you talked about some of the soot that got back into the rivers. And when I was growing up, and I was learning to fish, and I was just a little kid. I would go down to the Clinch River, but I was always told, "Oh, don't eat anything you catch out of the Clinch." Well, that attitude had probably been around for a long time, and
Yeah.
the river was still, actually, in hindsight, was still pretty dirty when I was a kid. So I'm glad I didn't. But now, I mean, it's fishing out of the Clinch and fishing out of the New River, and the Tennessee Basin down there below South Holston Dam. These places are just, we have pristine waters in a lot of places that maybe not have been so pristine 50 years ago.
Mhm.
Like you said, we've come a long way, and
Yeah.
and
Mother
even
Nature is the ultimate physician. She can heal
yeah,
herself if we just help her.
yeah, get out of
We
the way
don't really do
sometimes.
the healing. We don't
Yeah,
really do the healing. The Creator gave Mother Nature all the tools that she needs to heal herself if we can just help her.
yeah. It's one other interesting thing about the coal fly ash that laid around, and I know that they had some toxic stuff in that. But
Mhm.
even that now, I think technology's sort of caught up where you can filter that. We're actually finding some rare earth metals in the
Mhm.
coal fly ash that we could actually use that, for space and defense. It's kind of
Well, the key is we're
correct.
going to need all sources of energy, and we're going to need to be able to do them more efficiently and cleaner. And I think that progress is being made in that direction. And that's, I truly believe in the ingenuity of the American people, and I think that we'll continue to come up with improved ways of doing things. The economy is going to have a piece of it. Natural gas is always going to be a thorn in the side of coal, and it's just always going to be there, I think, as long as because I worked in Texas watching them flare natural gas off those plants because that wasn't what they were after, and then they found out they could start selling it for energy, making a little money. That put a hit on coal, but there are a lot of things that we need to work out together on how to get things done.
And there's a lot of natural gas throughout Appalachia. It's
Mhm.
yeah, so it's our resource here and for Appalachia to benefit from. And now your other book that you wrote these books because you said you wanted to leave behind sort of information for your family, your kids, your grandkids, what it was like. And I've noticed we've had I've probably talked to three or four other Appalachian authors that have had similar experiences as yours, but like in a different field, in a different industry, where they grew up and got into something, went to maybe Virginia Tech and worked in, knew about the logging business. That's how their family, put food on the tables, logging and here in Southwest Virginia and in East Tennessee. But they went out and did the corporate world and maybe went to Silicon Valley. So it's kind of like from Appalachia to Fish and Wildlife and the government and back, and it's a really interesting story because like you said before, the region with your grandparents, oh, we just got by. Nobody ever talked about how they got by. And I think these stories like this are very inspirational for um, anybody Gen Xers and on up to write their story and be an inspiration to people that are growing up now. It's like there's no limit to what we can accomplish, and it doesn't have to be limit you from where you're from. I mean, we can do anything we want in this world, and with that kind of like drive and attitude and respect for your creator. And yeah, did you want to maybe expound on the other book and
Yeah, this is from my Appalachian Trail, and it's just perfect with what you're saying. I'm glad I chose it because it really, I wanted to talk about my school. The teachers in Appalachia are extremely innovative. They make something out of nothing. I remember when I was in seventh grade, my seventh grade teacher, Mr. Smith, he didn't have a lot of extra things. There was no internet, there was none of that stuff. So he just had whatever books he had. But he brought the radio into class one day and we listened to Alan Glenn going into space. Then he asked us questions about it back and forth. But the teachers that we had and the schools that we went to were, I believe, were all like that. And I just like to read you a little bit here. uh, Now, I went to Loyal High School. Loyal was about 3 miles out of Harlan. I mean, I ended up graduating from Harlan High School my last year because the county schools consolidated. But Loyal was a county school, and we had all of 720 people or something like that in our community, about 3 miles outside of Harlan, which was the county seat. But I said Loyal was called a high school, but all 12 grades attended. The teachers there were more than teachers. They were role models and second parents. Our teachers in grade school, Mrs. Metters in third grade, Ms. Unthank in fourth grade, were like second mothers to us. We behaved in class because punishment at home was much worse than what we'd get at school. I was spanked with a wooden paddle by Mr. Smith in seventh grade and by the principal in high school. I deserved it and didn't dare complain to my parents. Once they found out why a teacher had punished me, I ran the risk that Daddy would have me cut a switch from the local bush and for him to use to punish me. I learned early not to bring back one that was too small to make the punishment less. If I did, he would cut one and it would not be small. They taught me economics, mainly for girls that they taught home economics, mainly for girls that prepared them to manage the household budget and live as adults. We also had to take civics, where we began class with the Pledge of Allegiance, learned how our government works and how to participate as citizens. We were taught to respect our flag and country. I wish schools today taught both home economics and civics to prepare young men and women to be productive members of society. In our haste to increase scholastic knowledge, I fear we may have abandoned essential education. I accept my bias, but I believe there was a magic in the halls of country schools that attracted the best teachers, wonderful teachers like Mrs. Hill, who taught me to not be afraid to speak in public. Ms. McFarland, who demanded we understand that hard work accompanied anything worth having. Mr. Smith, who made us realize how rich we were in the important things, and happiness cannot be gauged by appearances. And Mrs. Grant for her constant love and affection for us all. From this, I learned that education is tied neither to buildings nor supplies, but to people who are dedicated to their students and love teaching.
Yeah, and that's you're right. When these small schools, these small towns and counties, with the small classrooms here in the mountains, um, yeah, they have to be innovative because they don't have a choice. And these are some of the most impactful teachers. I can still think of a handful, the ones that I had that kind of gave me a love of history. And when I first took my first civics class and government class in high school, just kind of thinking about the wonder of what America is and how important, we learned a little bit of local history, how important our region is as well. And
And,
that's
and,
something
and
I think it's fallen off too. We need more local, more understanding of our local history, and how and then people who have succeeded being held up as kind of role models in that. Because how many people know, how many people have succeeded from here in Central Appalachia?
Well, obviously, my education did not depress me. We were not depressed. We were getting good education because I had no trouble manipulating myself through all of my career based upon that good foundation that I received in that little country school. And so we need to, I get really a little upset when people start talking about Appalachia as a depressed area. I think we're the most gifted area in the country. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
gifted with love and culture and a determination that says we don't know how to quit. And those are the really keys to success in life.
yeah, and just from you're right, and that's one of the things that the one of the reasons we set up this foundation. We got tired of the media coverage, like the way they portray people in movies and the stereotypes. And when you look at how important this region has been to the nation as a whole historically, a lot of people don't know this, but if I mention, say, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, a lot of people, the first thing they think of is the mystery of the Mothman. That whole thing, because that's what they think. You see that on the Travel Channel, the History Channel, but really, what happened? That was actually the first unofficial battle of the Revolutionary War. A bunch of upstart Appalachians that were part of Lord Dunmore's War, as they called it, trying to expand up into the Ohio Valley faster than the colonies from Pennsylvania. And the Brits were angry because these upstart Appalachians were going way past where they were told to go and trying to expand westward. And, we had great heroes, and, we blazed the trail through the Cumberland Gap. I mean, America would not be America if a bunch of upstart Appalachians didn't go up and fight against the British and Chief Cornstalk in West Virginia, and the Point Pleasant area. And but nobody even thinks about that. And there's a really interesting book you might find interesting called "The United States of Appalachia," and it highlights how impactful our region has been because anybody that ever went west had to come through here. I mean, this is where it started, and the expansion west, and a lot of people have family ties back here, and it's just something that's not really realized. And we talk about the environment. It's such a unique environment too. Now, you were with Ducks Unlimited. Before I let you go, let's talk a little bit about what you did with Ducks Unlimited and with the wetlands, because that's a very important project I've known about for a long time.
Well, Ducks Unlimited was established in 1937 by hunters who said, we want to do more. Actually, the first the movement in conservation started with Theodore Roosevelt in the late 1800s in this country. And I remind people that often that real true conservation is barely 100 years old now, because he started in the late 1800s because he was working out west. He was sick. Remember, Theodore Roosevelt had these respiratory problems, so he went out west saw the decimation of the bison, thought that was atrocious because they were killing the bison to the buffalo to starve out the Indians and get them off the prairie so that the whites could come settle. And he thought that was atrocious. He came back and helped form. He and Audubon and Pinchot and some of the others helped form what today is modern conservation with the Boone and Crockett Club. That was the first one that was first formed, and from all the rest of us kind of came from that one. All the conservation organizations. Well, then fast forward to the Depression, and everybody was killing everything so they could eat. It was just the way it was. So all the game was almost gone. So some duck hunters got together and decided to create Ducks Unlimited and put money into trying helping the ducks. And so that, this is a resource. We believe it's ours by Constitution. In the United States, the fish, the wildlife, the water, and the air belong to the people. None of us individually can own those. So a deer in Virginia belongs to the people of Virginia and is held in trust by the state of Virginia for the people, but the people own it. And so these hunters said, it's our responsibility. This is our resource. We'll pay. So they literally started Ducks Unlimited and started raising money to put up there. And that was in 1937. And that went on and all the way up through the years, and for until the 80s, all the money went to Canada, where the nesting grounds are, to try and help them there. And then we realized these birds, they're migrators. They need a round trip ticket and go all the way down to Mexico. So Ducks Unlimited helped form Ducks Unlimited Canada and Ducks Unlimited de Mexico. The three of them worked together continentally to help try and take care of the waterfowl. And to date, just in America, we have conserved over 15 million acres of wetlands and grasslands that the waterfowl use to nest and to survive on. That's 15 million acres in the United States by private money, by people that give it and don't ask anything back except, their fair share when it comes time to go hunting. And so Ducks Unlimited has been around for a long time. When I was there from 2010 until 2019, in that period of time, we raised probably in excess, not probably, I know in excess of $2.5 billion, and put on the ground in excess of 2 million acres of habitat. And again, hardly anybody knows this is going on, but it's there for everybody to do. So Ducks Unlimited is the largest wetlands and waterfowl conservation organization in the world. And a lot of other organizations mimic how we raise money and do things.
Now, how much of that land is over at, say, Eastern Kentucky or Central Kentucky?
Kentucky has mostly, I don't know about Eastern and Appalachia, but over in Western, certainly. There is land in Western Kentucky over there near the rivers, the Ohio and where it goes into the Mississippi. You've got a lot of that area over there. Waterfowl used an awful lot. The waterfowl are not that's not one of the strong species in the mountain areas. You'll have some that will drift over, but the main flyway is down the Mississippi River, and they'll drift over into Appalachia, but not a whole lot. Now they're going down into North Carolina and up into Virginia. Yeah, there's wetlands that are being taken care of there through this as well through Ducks Unlimited. Eastern Kentucky, though, is pretty montane. The mountains and the valleys make it more for the grouse and the mountain species than it does for the wetland species.
Yeah, because I do see some of the local hunting shows on like certain PBS channels that are state based, like KET in Kentucky and the PBS in Virginia, where you see, like, I think Virginia Field or Kentucky Field or the Virginia Currents, and you see a lot of. So occasionally you get an episode where they're talking about the conservation, and I think probably some of it over in the eastern side of Virginia. When you get over towards
Definitely Eastern
the coast,
Virginia.
yeah.
Definitely.
But it's a very important project, and like I said, we nature has a symbiotic relationship. What impacts one place impacts another, and we have so many challenges here in Appalachia, I guess, with environment and wildlife management. I'm glad to see the elk coming back slowly, but now
Yeah.
now people can hunt elk here now. Um, I think I saw a couple on the side of the road through West Virginia one day. I was surprised to see it there. I was like, that's elk, right? Like I can tell the difference between a deer and an elk.
Oh yeah, it's not hard to tell elk are significantly bigger animals than a deer is. You know, a good bull elk can easily weigh 700 or 800 pounds on the hoof, and you'll still get 200 or 300 pounds of meat out of it. They're big animals.
And what a lot of people don't realize is when hunters go out, like deer hunters especially, a lot of that meat gets handed down to homeless shelters,
Oh
and
yeah,
so yeah, your hunters are the and fishermen are the biggest conservationists out there, and
they're always giving. Conservation in this country is paid for by the hunter and the angler, the boater and the shooter. If you're a recreational shooter going to shooting ranges, you're a boater, you're a hunter, or you're an angler. 90% or better of all of the money that the state agencies depend on to operate the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife
Mhm.
resources. I don't know. I haven't looked it up, but the average usually is no more than 5 or 10% of the entire budget comes from the state legislature. All of the rest comes from those sources that I just named, the users. So they've always been willing to pay for and keep conservation going. And they are the true conservationists working out there. But we also have what I wrote about the citizen conservationist. Um, yeah, Aldo Leopold wrote in a Sand County Almanac about the environmental citizen. It said, you know, people are just a citizen along with other species and all that. And I wouldn't argue with that, but I think there needs to be a strong recognition for what I call the citizen conservationist, the person that takes the money out of their pocket, puts it into something, and makes donations. Like I say, when I left Ducks Unlimited, our last year there, we raised $235 million in one year from just from people that said, okay, we're giving you donations and we're doing things because you're doing the right thing. It's hard to find another aspect of society where that happens other than taking care of children at St. Jude's,
Yeah.
something like that. But other than that, they're dedicated conservationists because they believe that they are part of nature, and that our DNA it tells us that these are our kinsmen. And yes, we hunt them, but nature is about predator prey. Everything in nature is about predator and prey. Everything eats something else, and so something is a predator and something is a prey. That is absolutely uh, in sync with everything in our world. And there's nothing wrong with man being a predator over prey, especially when he or she is the one that's making sure that prey is there and paying to have it there. So hunters and anglers are what I call the citizen conservationists, the landowners that put money on their property to provide habitat, knowing they can only take a little bit of it.
Well, before I let you go today, I appreciate all this time. I really do. And I can have you back on here anytime you want to come back on and talk about conservation. I'd love to have you back because I have a million questions and our shows don't run that long. But before we go, what are some of your favorite fishing holes around here? Not just maybe here, but like where you're at now, just in the
Well, I
area.
got to tell you, I go fishing every year. I make a point to come back and fish in Kentucky with some of my buddies, and we go fish on Lake Cumberland. And I really love fishing there for the stripers and getting into those fish and so every year I go up there with some of my buddies and then when I come back into Kentucky over to the eastern part, if I have time, I still love to go in some of those mountain streams and just throw a line out and see what's there.
Yeah,
There's something about that, like I say, our DNA, and I challenge anyone to sit by a campfire and watch the flames and not become at peace. To sit by that stream where you can hear the water going over the riffles, and that's the only sound that you're hearing, and not feel your body come at peace. We're part of nature, and I just love to experience that every chance I get.
when I go fishing and I feel like I'm just sitting there talking to God, and
Yeah.
I'm the kind of guy I keep fishing equipment in my back of my SUV because I just might want to stop somewhere and start fishing. That's the kind of guy I am, and I know it's
I do that when I'm
kind of weird.
hunting and fishing. I call
Yeah,
it I call it the Creator's Cathedral.
yeah,
And and when I'm hunting or fishing, I'm spending my time talking to my creator.
and yeah, I keep that stuff in the back of the car so I can accidentally went fishing. accidentally, right? So, but I haven't done that in a while. But I do love some of the mountain streams around here in Central Appalachia and Eastern Kentucky, and really great places to fish.
Well, the Appalachian brookie is still a sought after fish.
Have you been to Rogersville for striper fishing in
No, I
Tennessee?
haven't.
Okay, yeah, it's used to be pretty good down there. I haven't been there in a number of years, but a friend of mine used to go every year. I think he probably still goes every year. Um, and then, have you fished the New River? I mean, it's like one of the oldest rivers on the planet, right? So,
I
uh,
don't think. Where's it?
the New River, it'll run through Radford, Virginia, and then um,
No, it sounds like a place I need to fish.
yeah, it's they think they call it the second oldest river in the world.
Wow. Okay.
Um, and in some places it runs backwards. Like it runs north, so it's kind of weird how it does. I've fished out of it. It's you never know what you're going to catch out of the New River. It was great fishing through that part of Virginia, which is kind of borderline on the West Virginia border, and then it runs north. And great. I've caught like I tell people I caught a monster out of the New River at Radford, Virginia, but I have no idea what I caught because it got close and my little 6 pound line wasn't holding whatever it was, so it broke. And I'm like, oh man, I would love to have hauled that in. My luck would have probably been about this small, just putting up a bigger
Well,
fight than I thought it would.
well, I really learned how to bass fish and worm fish, the plastic worm fishing when I was going to Cumberland College for my undergraduate degree.
Yeah.
And I would sneak down to Norris Lake and we'd fish at night where you cast it out there and you have to feel everything. You have to feel the line when the fish hit and all that. And boy, what a great teacher that was to on how to really get the sense of feeling the line and what it's doing. And it just, again, I just love every aspect of hunting and fishing.
Yeah, I've never been hunting, but I've done certainly my fair share of fishing. But yeah, it's a beautiful experience just being in nature. But I appreciate you coming back here. Yeah, you want to tell people where you can find your books at?
The first book, Compelled, my wife and I, Sarah, met her in Louisiana when I went to LSU for graduate school. We decided we wanted to give the money back from that book, so we received none of the money. It's sold by Ducks Unlimited. You can go online to Ducks Unlimited, and you can go online to Bass Pro Shops. Johnny Morris, founder of Bass Pro, is a good friend of mine, and he knew about this book, and he said, we'll sell it for you, and we'll give the money back to conservation as well. So the money goes through Ducks Unlimited. It goes to an endowed professorship that trains students in waterfowl and wetlands biology.
Wow.
It can, but you can also get my Appalachian Trail ebook. I'm sorry, Compelled ebook online at Amazon or anywhere else because I did ebook differently than the others. My Appalachian Trail, you can get it at Amazon, Borders, online. Jan Carroll Publishing is the publisher, and you can get it there. But that one is easier to get. But you'd have to get Compelled at either Bass Pro or Ducks Unlimited.
Okay, because I saw it was also on Amazon too.
Yeah, Amazon. Yeah, Compelled. The ebook is if you're an
Yeah.
ebook reader, then you can get that on Amazon.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's definitely make sure you check those out. Do you have any social media where people can follow along and keep up with any news you may post?
Dale Hall LLC at gmail.com.
Okay. Well, certainly appreciate you coming on. Do you have any social media, Facebook or?
No, I've got just Dale Hall Facebook is all it is. But
okay.
I didn't create a separate one for the author. It's just my
Okay.
Facebook, and
Okay.
that's you can find me by just looking up Dale Hall on
Yeah,
Facebook.
I have one on Facebook, but I'm not on there much. So I guess I got bored with the social media too, like a lot of people. But I appreciate your time and sharing the books with us, and hopefully you'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about conservation. So it's certainly a big issue around here.
Been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you. Thanks again, everybody. Make sure you stop by and pick up one of his books, and make sure you follow along our podcast anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast on your Apple iPhone, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And visit us online at supportappalachia.org. Thanks again for listening to another episode of Appalachian Shine, and we'll be seeing you down the road.